Awesome. Welcome to the podcast, Cliff. How are you?
I'm good. How about you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
There's a little note from me behind the scenes that we initially had planned a different conversation here, but this one worked out so good that I just wanted to roll directly into it and just give you a heads up on that if it sounds like a harsh transition here. So without further ado, here is our entire chat with Cliff Wilson.
What would you say are kind of like the big things to start with?
Yeah, I would say depending on the person, first off, probably 20 to 50% of my job is impulse control.
Oh, for sure.
I spent a lot of years about in my first few years of coaching, it was I love diet and I love training, and I'm going to draw great diet programs and training programs. And I realized that, maybe 40% of my clients would really thrive because I felt like I was proficient at that. But then the other 60 would just struggle. The other 60% would just struggle. And I couldn't always put my finger on why. And and then over the years I've started to realize, well, some of it's psychological, you know what I mean? And then it's this other thing. And then I started to realize this is bodybuilding. It's different than other sports because on the day of the competition we aren't doing the thing that we're really judged on. We're judged on our bodies, but the thing we do to build our bodies, we do on our own. And I came to the conclusion that, like, even if it's not bodybuilding, just physique improvement, like other sports, it is a skill based endeavor. And these skills are extremely varied and they have different levels. And so what I mean by that is it's interesting because, my clientele, the other thing that's a little strange because in coaching bodybuilders, I'm kind of asked to do something that coaches in other sports are not asked to do. And that is coach people at significantly different levels. Um, I've coached 24 world champions in my career now. And right now
Nice.
I coach the current world champion in natural bodybuilding. And it's funny because sometimes I will coach him through email. So let's say in basketball terms, I'm coaching LeBron James. And then the very next email, I'm coaching a first time competitor who's never competed before and has only been training 2 years. So I'm coaching in 1 second, I say something to the world champion. It's to be like asking a basketball coach to be like, okay, LeBron, let's do this and let's do that. And then turn around and talk to a seventh grade basketball player. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, so I try to frame it in, it helps me sometimes to frame it in what skill level am I talking to? What skill level? And so you mentioned people seeing somebody on the internet and they said, I need to do this. In basketball terms, I see some people trying to dunk when they don't even know how to dribble.
Yeah.
You know? and and I'm like, I want you to develop one skill at a time. Like a lot of times these people on the internet, they'll get really highly focused on some supplement or whatever. And I'm like, you probably, because in my experience, most people that don't compete, even some people that do, have an incredibly hard time sticking to a caloric prescription for more than 3 to 4 days without a deviation.
hmm
That's a skill. You know what I mean? That little voice in your head when you get hungry, being able to not give in to that voice is very much a skill. And so that's a big one right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I feel like it's, again, related to that. It's also levels. And like you talked about, who is giving the advice and who is giving the advice at what point in their career. Like, so example I use all the time is people send me videos of, Jay Cutler on video saying, bench press isn't really that useful. You should do this or that other exercise. I'm like, okay, that's, coming from him, that's probably good advice. However, they leave out the part of the clip where he literally says right before this, I didn't really get too much out of bench press anymore because I was already bench pressing 405 by the time I left high school.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, that's kind of an important qualifier. Like if 95 is trying to squash you and 135 is hard, you might be able to get a lot of runway out of the bench press.
Yes. Yeah. You bring up an interesting point that I have been really on about, and I've been trying to figure out a way to kind of, work it into my own social media, but is like we exist in a current state of the industry where, I like you said, you've worked with, I know you've worked with a lot of like professional sports teams. You are actively in practice. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
yeah, definitely.
you do the thing. Um, and I do the thing in my own sphere. And frequently I will get people there, they'll quote some social media commentator to me.
Yeah, commentator's a
And
good one.
I'm like, this guy doesn't even do the thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and I'm like, I'll kind of equate it once again to other sports is like they don't start talking to LeBron James about what Stephen A. Smith thinks he needs to be doing on the pick and roll. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like everyone understands he's an entertainer. He's not an educator or somebody that actually is actively practicing this thing. You know what I mean? And so it's I think people have really lost sight of that. And you mentioned Jay Cutler, like he did the thing, but another thing that's really interesting is I've also kind of there's a lot of influencers where they do kind of partake in this fitness space, but they kind of bridge that line between participant and entertainer, and
Hmm.
I coach a lot of these guys, some in the front, sometimes they'll include me, sometimes I just coach them behind the scenes. um and sometimes there's a deviation between what they are telling people they are doing and what they are actually doing.
Oh, for
um
sure.
And so that's another hurdle to overcome when trying to talk to the general public at large.
Yeah, I feel like it's become an eyeballs contest, not necessarily providing good content. And on one hand, yeah, I get it. Do I put out social media content? Yes. Do I want to get more eyeballs on my content? Yes. But at some point, I'm not gonna sell my soul to do it either. You know what I mean? Like you,
Yeah.
and everyone I think who is doing the craft goes through this of, okay, here's the thing you need to hear that probably won't get a lot of clicks. Here's something else that's maybe a little bit more on the edge that maybe might get more eyeballs. And for me, like my model is if I can get you onto a newsletter, okay, now I can talk to you in a long form comment for every day for, potentially years on end, right? So that's kind of my thing. But and even friends of mine who are researchers who I love and do really good research, if I hear one more of them tell me to go do Tabatas or the Norwegian 4x4, I'm like, most people can't execute that because they're not at that level. And the fact that you're telling everyone, even like potentially untrained people, to do it at that exact protocol, you would think people would go, oh, well, you clearly haven't trained anyone then. Yet it doesn't invalidate the research. And they're not saying that the research is bad. It seems like we're looking to the wrong people to get actual applied advice instead of looking at people who, shocker, make their money getting people results or they wouldn't have a business.
Yes. Yeah. And you are right. It's like sometimes the recommendations are not necessarily wrong, but
Yeah.
they're not for the crowd. Um, One thing that I often struggle with too is um, just as an example, for somebody that really wants to improve their physique, if we even take the diet side, there's so much poured into what I would call sidestepping the hard.
Yeah.
Um, you know, like oh, we'll follow a keto diet, or then it's carnivore diet or intermittent fasting, or whatever the fad is at the time. And for some reason, with training, people have this inherent understanding that you can't necessarily sidestep the hard. Although I feel like that's become a thing a little bit as well. But like they understand if you squat 185 pounds this week, the goal is to squat 190 pounds next week. Like it's going to get harder. You're not asking for it to get easier. You know what I mean? You
Hmm.
just want to be capable. And for some reason, when it comes to fat loss, the leaner you get, I mean, the leaner you get, the hungrier you get, almost regardless of the caloric intake. Because, if you have somebody that's like down to 5% body fat at show level, you can give them 4,000 calories in that day and they're still going to feel hungry.
Yeah, their
Um,
body says, bro, I'm almost dead.
yes. Yeah. And so there seems to be this inherent understanding that the more advanced you get, it does not get harder, you just get stronger. But with fat loss, the leaner you get, you're not going to be able to avoid that hunger. It's so
No.
body fat dependent. And it's like you need to develop the tools inside your head to withstand that. It's, you're not asking for it to get easier. Don't try to make it easier. It's just going to get harder. You need to get stronger. And people don't want to hear that.
Yeah, it's like when I have people do a max a VO2 test, even online, we'll put them on the rower and have them do a 2K all out, so 2,000 meters. And several clients now have gotten significantly better. One girl, she got, I think she improved her time by like 20 seconds over like 6 months. And she just did 3 max tests during that time. And on her third test, she's like, but this just feels just as horrible as the first one. And I'm like, yeah. She's
You
like,
did
but I
more.
thought it would be better. I'm like, but you improved your time by a massive amount. But I'm like, it's never a true all-out max test is never gonna feel better. It's just
Yeah,
not.
you do better. It doesn't feel better.
Right, right. She's like, oh, just so disappointed.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the other thing that I wish people would really understand is how important context is
Yes.
with that, because like there is a significant variability from person to person. Um, and actually a fantastic example. This is just one example, but so I mentioned that I coached last year's world champion. I also coached the third place at the World Championships.
Oh,
So
cool.
first and third. So they were very close, right? The day before the show, to produce their best looks, the guy that won the World Championship consumed 700 grams of carbohydrates.
Damn.
The day before the show, the guy that took third consumed 50 grams of carbohydrates. Um,
Bro, you didn't
drastically.
carb load him? What are you doing, you idiot?
I know. And I don't think people realize, and as different, that's just like a microcosm of their entire prep, to be honest with
Sure.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Like they could not have taken more different paths to get to, they're all three standing on the podium, and their paths to get there could not have been more different in terms of training and diet. And so it's interesting. You mentioned like same thing. I have to create my own social media content, and I find that the more I actually understand, which I've been doing this 16 years, and I feel like every few years I'm there's something that you learn or you put in perspective
For
or
sure.
whatever. The more advanced I get, the harder it is to make social media content, because I'm like, I can't say anything worth saying in this little window. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, now you got like 10 seconds, bro. Like you gotta get, if I get one more DM from someone who's like, oh, 3 minutes is too long, 2 minutes, like you gotta be under like 20 seconds now. Like, 20 seconds? What do you even say in 20? Protein good. See ya. I mean, like, come on.
Yeah, it is interesting and frustrating, but I think the thing is like, I guess I've really tried to boil down to, I'm going to, even like I mentioned, like I have my own training app now. And the thing that I'm trying to put together is, how do I show people what is actually valuable? Um,
Yeah.
but the problem right now is everyone seems to be in a gear of what is simple. And so the spot that I get into is, I'm fortunate because my clients usually by the time they reach me, they have an understanding of my track record. So they have a buy-in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're
Totally.
like, yeah, they're like, I trust that what you're saying is valuable or what you're prescribing. But I think the problem is trying to disassociate the average person from, um, the more famous the person, the more valuable the information, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
But no, it is a challenge. But the thing that I like about this process with coaching bodybuilders is that I enjoy that variability, and I enjoy that there is so much gray area, depending on the context. And because it is always like this continual puzzle that you need to figure out for this person, which frustrates the average person, but really excites me.
Yeah, but I'm sure you'd agree that's how you learn. Like, I mean, one of the only reasons I still work with clients is because I like it, and the amount of questions and problems I have to solve is never ending. Like it, and that on one hand can be incredibly frustrating, but on the other hand, it's like, oh wow, it's like forced learning, right? So like, oh my God, this person's paying me a lot of money. Like it's definitely in my wheelhouse of what I can do, but then something will come up and they're like, oh, well, now I have this or I have that or, whatever. And I think just over time, being able to expand the variability you can handle, I think also makes you more valuable. I mean, I've worked with everything from post-cancer patients to competitive athletes to some physique stuff, everything in between. But all of them kind of have something that's just not right that they can't quite figure out, right? No one just is like, hey, here's your program. And they're like, oh, great. And 16 weeks later, they're amazing. It just, nothing's ever that simple.
You know, you are right. You do learn, and you are right. Like when you open up the scope of like the demographic you're working with, usually there's something you can carry back into these other demographics as well. And sometimes it's very hard for me to explain this because I run like a mentorship program, and sometimes it gets very difficult for me to understand. They probably think, oh gosh, he's going off on something like I just wanted to learn. But I get influences, sometimes I think right now our current culture, because it's just, fast, fast, fast. And I think even the more scientifically inclined individuals in the industry, they get on this in this mode where it becomes consumption of data and scientific research, but it's almost just for the purpose of regurgitation, right? I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to read the results and I'm going to regurgitate it. I would rather sometimes have people read a study in full and ponder it before they read another one. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
um, and what is said, but what is implied? What is potentially, what are the downstream effects of this? Um, and sometimes even reading things that are not, physique related and thinking about, if I can give a total sidebar, but like
Definitely.
I try to, what was a significant improvement for myself in my coaching. Remember I said 40% of my clients were doing great and 60% were struggling. You know what, a thing that significantly improved this was that when I first started, I think anybody that inherently likes to coach, when you start off, you want to control every variable. You want to control, and especially in bodybuilding, you're like, I'm going to control the
Oh,
time they eat.
yeah.
I'm going to control the time they eat and what they eat
Yep.
and how they train.
Weigh their
Um,
broccoli.
I have a lot of interests outside of bodybuilding, and I was reading some various articles on just different economic systems,
Mm-hmm.
and the article presented some interesting data that basically freer market, economies tended to thrive. The more restrictions put on it, there inevitably was some problems. The idea being that some outside entity that doesn't have a full understanding of the market they are regulating sometimes didn't understand the challenges within the market because they're on the outside. And
Yep.
I kind of was like, I'm on the outside of these people's lives and I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
regulate their lives. You know what I mean? Like I can say, you still there?
Yep.
Sorry there. Okay. I can say,
Nope. Your screen. There we go. We're
oh,
good.
there we go. I can say, let's eat, you know, 3 hours before the gym. And I can say, eat this food, but I don't know what their work schedule's like. I don't know what time their babysitter is available. I don't know a lot about their lives. You know what I mean? I can ask, but I mean, honestly, if I'm going to delve into all of that, I would need to charge each client like a couple thousand per
Yeah.
month.
And
And
it's
it's
going to
like,
change.
it's going to change. And I was like, I need to instead give them some autonomy in this process. And
Hmm.
and I kind of started going with the approach of um, they should get the most autonomy they are capable of handling. So I almost went the opposite route. I completely revamped things. And the success rate of my clients drastically improved. I am trying not to interrupt their lives as much as possible, only as much as I have to.
Hmm.
And I did not read that from a fitness, a diet or training study. I was just poking around some economics articles, and I kind of had this, carried it over. And it was a drastic overhaul of my coaching, and it worked wonders. I'm trying not to interrupt their lives. Their lives should be as unimpeded as possible. And I think it's just, once again, sometimes sitting and pondering on things. And I've even said this, I said this to you before, but it's like you said a few things to me 10 years ago that were probably just a couple of one-off lines you were saying, and I sat on those for a couple of years, and it kind of permeated a lot of what I did from this bit of information. And it wasn't something that I was just like, I didn't just hear it and be like, just go spouting it off everywhere. Does that make sense? I
Hmm.
really wanted to take it to heart and think of all the downstream repercussions of that. And I don't know. I just think that there's less pondering going on than there should be.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And that's, kudos to you for doing that, because I feel like everything is so, like you said, rapid fire, not necessarily for deep learning, but to, oh, what's the next Instagram thing I can put out on this, right? There's a, yeah, it's sort of a weird disconnect. Like I realized this years ago that I, so when I design stuff, I separate intake from output. I don't know if you ever get this way, but when I'm doing a lot of output, I'm doing a lot of writing, I'm, designing courses and working with clients. After a while, I can only do that so long without having any input. Like I have to read more studies, talk to other people, go to conferences, etc. But there's this input kind of output balance, and I feel like if I get too skewed one direction or the other, I just feel kind of off. And then if I'm designing something, I'll take as much input as I can. And then at some point, I'll actually stop all the input and then give myself, ideally, 4, 6 weeks or whatever, just to think about in the background. I'll just write notes. I used to do stuff like I'd lock myself in a freaking 90-minute float tank, and I have a shift wave chair I'm playing around with now for stuff like that, or just simple meditation. Ideally, I'd do this before I go on a kiteboard trip. If I go kiteboard, I do something physical, something that's completely different, not even necessarily thinking about those things, but the amount of ideas like subconsciously and other you'll think about and have pop up is kind of crazy. And I feel like a lot of everything now is so, I just need to learn this to learn the thing, but you don't know what the thing really is. And sometimes, like you said, you don't really necessarily know what you need to learn either. So having part of that 10%, 20% being outside of your, like domain discipline type thing, which one of my favorite books is Range, right? So to David Epstein of, can you be really good at these two skill sets and find like an overlap with them? And I feel like everybody is still trying to go one direction, but you can be 90% and 90% in two different things, and the overlap you can be world class in. But trying to be like, LeBron James in the NBA, like, good luck. Like there are people who do that, but it's a much, much smaller percentage and minority for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you said the input and the output and I can tell even by the way that you speak is that you do a lot of orienting of information, which I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of people do well. So once again, I don't have my degree in this. I'm entirely self-educated, but my dad's a PhD in plant pathology, so it's like I'm just kind
Oh,
of
interesting. Huh.
yeah. So I'm very familiar with scientific processes, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and so I guess the thing that I always try to ask myself when I'm working with a client, but also fitness information at large, I kind of always ask myself, what do I know? What do I think? And what am I sure I do not know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I kind of ask myself those questions because honestly, asking yourself those questions and or at least trying to categorize those things, it always leads you somewhere. And you mentioned like that, and I think the orienting of information. A lot of people, another thing outside of fitness that I often use, like you said, input and output. Um, In the military, they use something called OODA loops. And I always kind of think of that even in my coaching space is, observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's like I do a lot of observing, of course, but like that they in OODA loops in the military, the orient. How do you orient the information that you've taken in? And it's like I always try to give myself different ways of thinking about things. How can I reorder the same information to make it make sense or whatever it may be? And then it kind of gives me good perspective on then how I proceed to act. And even just as a typical example, for the longest time, I when you become familiar with like time courses of training, for example, like I train a muscle, it may grow for 24 to 48 hours, or you see that uptick in, protein synthesis. And it's like, okay, it usually leads you to train a muscle group 2 to 3 days per week, at some point in your career. But it seemed to me like almost every advanced bodybuilder ends up in a bro split at the end of their career.
Mm-hmm.
And I also kind of take the approach of like, I mean, when I say every advanced bodybuilder, I mean, we're probably looking at something like 90% of the bodybuilders end up in some version of some kind of bro split at the end of their career. And I kind of take the approach of something almost always is and has been, maybe it's serving a purpose that I have not identified yet. And so, I kind of was just like, there might be some value to this. And it's like I spend a lot of time thinking about what that value might be. And so honestly, I kind of just landed on, and I even just ended up trying it with some more advanced bodybuilders. And I'll be honest, my bodybuilders that have been training 15 to 20 years, they did thrive more on maybe not a full bro split, but maybe 5 days between each muscle group being trained, or like a main day and then kind of a carrier day. I don't know the exact reason, but I would venture to say something like, I would venture it's probably because once you reach such an advanced stage, it takes a real bolus stimulus. You know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
to produce growth, where it almost demands 5 days of recovery just to produce a stimulus that's worth a damn to someone so advanced. But it's like, once again, that process of when I remember when thinking, okay, why does every bodybuilder land on this eventually? And I think that just goes into the category of there's something I think that's conflicting with something that I don't know. And so I got to get to the bottom of this. So those types of things, I think they lead you on a real journey in your head, if that makes sense, to where you can go. And I think if I spend a long time just being like, I got to get to social media, I know the time course of muscle protein synthesis uptick after I train it, I got to tell people they need to train each muscle group 2 to 3 days per week, I'd really miss out on all the potential, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I've probably put out stuff saying that before too. But we also forget that bodybuilding especially is so hyper muscle specific.
Yeah.
It's like, what
Yeah.
about like the whole nervous system? What about the immune system? What about all these other systems? And again, is that I have tons of buddies who do, that kind of research. Is it super interesting? Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating because it's giving us pretty good data on one aspect of it. But again, all of that data, I don't know of an N of one that's even done from an advanced bodybuilder,
Well,
right? So I
and
would love to get like a stable isotope infusion in advanced person who just goes and obliterates themselves and then see because the data right now would say it might be as short as 24 hours, right? Because the more trained you are, it tends to get shorter. But again, that's not like high level professional bodybuilder trained. That's more trained than recreationally trained people.
yeah, and it's also like honestly, I don't even start implementing that until someone's been training hard for like 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, you're measuring
That's,
decades.
I know it's like the most specific group, and even like I try to just once again take in. I try to always reconcile what I'm seeing in the research with what I'm seeing in person. Like even
Yeah.
if another example, well, there's such a big right now low volume in the fitness sphere. Like we talk about this low volume and like heavy focus on the 4 to 8 rep range, and then mechanical tension is all that matters. Is like very popular. And the thing that always makes me laugh though is like, bodybuilding is like any other sport. Genetics matter so much.
Oh,
And
for
so
sure.
it's like, even if I draw this thing here, but it's like every group, every person is competing within their own genetic grouping. So like, even as I draw this right here, right? This top group is just competing within their own genetic group. There's some overlap with the middle group here, and then there's the bottom group that's
Yeah.
competing against each other. The poor guys down here, but it's like, people will be like, "Oh, Mike Menser got to be a great bodybuilder on low volume, so it's possible." And Dorian Yates, was a low volume, user, and he got to the top. And I'm like, okay, but here's the thing is, these guys are such outliers in the low volume group in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
You are literally naming them by name.
Yeah, yeah.
like
And you got 2.
yes, I know. And so I'm
Maybe
like,
Casey Viator. Like, you got 3 now. Okay.
yeah. So I'm like, you are looking at everybody at the top end of the top end. And so when you say low volume works, you can't compare these guys in the top, of this little Venn diagram here at the top. You can't do that and compare them to the lower group, because they're
Yeah.
going to surpass that lower group and the middle group no matter what. They are the outliers. If we were going to plot this on a data chart with, what I mean, like they'd be the guys just completely outlier from the pack. So something tells me they were probably going to get the top no matter what, or maybe they had some special needs that, special recovery needs we weren't aware of. But it gets difficult sometimes to explain that to people where, like you said, this is such a specific endeavor with very specific results we are after. And it gets very difficult to put everything in context within a decent time course, that's for sure.
Yeah. The examples I think of is a buddy of mine trained at the gym in Canada with Paul Dillette, famous pro bodybuilder back in the
Yeah.
day. People are familiar with him. Just freaky physique. And I was asking him, I was like, "Oh, he must train pretty hard." He's like, "Oh, fuck no!" Like the guy would come in and do press downs with like 60 pounds, and have these monster try. He's like the guy he trained, yeah, but he's like half rep, partial rep. Like he didn't do anything he thought was very impressive, in terms of load or anything else. And again, this was later in his career, so it could have been injuries, could have been a bunch of stuff. Maybe he's just maintaining or whatever. Um, which is hilarious to think that there are some people who enough drugs and a little bit of stimulus are just gonna be freaks no matter what.
Yeah, I think
Nobody
back to
wants
the
to hear
early.
that, but
I know. I've had, luckily, of all the world champions I've worked with, they've been incredibly hard workers. But I think back to the first few years of my career, I had a guy who turned pro, won multiple pro shows, and even took as high as, he was natural, and took as high as 5th place at the Natural World Championships. And I remember I would get together and train with him occasionally in person. He was close enough to me that I could do it. And I never saw him take a set to failure. Never
hmm.
once. And I would try to push him to do it, and he would terminate the set every time. He would say things to me like, I mean, his entire training approach, regardless of what I put on the paper, was, I would categorize it as vibes. It was just, it was just like, he's like, I like to come in, get a good feel, get a good pump. He's like, I think it's just important to get the blood flowing. And he would say stuff like that, and he would just like, his working sets looked like mine and everybody else's warm ups. And I never saw him squat over 315, despite massive legs.
Hmm.
And I mean, someone his size you'd think would be doing well over 405,
Yeah.
And it was just, he's like, I just like to come in, and he goes, I think it's just really important to keep things positive and, enjoy the journey. And it was just like, he's just feeling good in the gym. There was no, you think of like Dorian Yates, what was his documentary called? Blood and Guts.
Yeah,
This was unicorns and rainbows. This was like, it was just like, I just like to get a good feel coming into the gym. And he just he would go on stage and destroy everybody. And I remember sometimes he'd get these wins, and I'd think to myself, I have so little to do with this. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this was meant to be. He was gonna do this no matter what. But yeah, I think some people are just built to, and people don't like hearing that. They don't.
No.
And and then some people would see him train and they would be like, oh well, he's definitely on PEDs, and I'm like, no, I mean this guy didn't even like to take Tylenol. You know what I mean? Like he was, like the idea that he would put a needle in himself was like beyond so far off of, you know what I mean, of what
Yeah.
he would be capable of. So it's like, um, yeah, people don't want to admit that genetics matter. And I always just think in my job, I'm trying to get people to the top of their own genetic subgroup. That's
Yeah.
my main, um, that's my main goal. There are some people where it's like, yeah, they're never going to be, I mean, even with myself, I'm a professional natural bodybuilder. Uh, I won my pro card at a very big show, and I took second in my pro debut. And for someone with my own genetics, that's like a big deal. Do you know what I mean? It's
Oh, that's
like
amazing. That's
I'm probably
great.
not I'm probably never going to go. I'm never going to place top 5 at the world championships or anything like that. But it's like, what can you do with the tools that someone has? And it's like it's I don't know. I think it's where again, it's hard to get people to realize that sometimes the people that look the best did not get that from what they're actually doing. It's just what their parents gave them.
Yeah, it's like I talked to buddies about this too. The longer we've been doing stuff, the more I think you have an appreciation for how freaky the true freaks actually are. Like it's just, I made this analogy before, like seeing an NFL human who weighs 280, you look at him and go, yeah, definitely looks like an athlete, definitely got a lot of muscle mass. And then you see them move, you're like, what the fuck was that? There's no way. Like, you watch that person standing, there's no way that guy's gonna move like that. You're like, what? That's possible?
It's interesting. So well, and it is true. So like, I played basketball in high school and a little bit in college, and I was like compared to the average person, a good basketball player. I'm much more suited for basketball than I am like bodybuilding in some regards. Um, and so I played. I was on Valparaiso's team. So it was Division 1, but in high school I had played against guys that did eventually go to the
Oh,
NBA,
nice.
and because I was on one of the top 50 AAU teams in the country in high school, and I played against like Shannon Brown, who played for the Lakers, and we did play LeBron James's team. I didn't have to guard him, but like, but I did have to guard Shannon Brown, and he was still in high school at the time, and I remember the variance between us was wild. Like how fast he moved, you know what I mean? The speed. And then I went to college, and I remember we would in practice. Do you know who Bryce Drew was?
No.
Uh, so Bryce Drew, he played for Valparaiso, and he played for the Bulls in the NBA.
Oh, okay.
So he would come in and scrimmage against us because his dad was the coach of Homer Drew was the coach of the team. And Bryce was playing for the Bulls at the time. I think he was just wrapping up his career at the time or whatever. And Bryce was about my height, about 6'2", about my weight. And so I always had to guard him in practice. And once again, if I go to a park anywhere, usually I'm just destroying everybody at the park, right? I can just pick up and destroy most average people. And it was completely hopeless trying to guard him. I remember I would eventually get to the point where my only hope to stop him was trying to cover his eyes so he couldn't see the basket, but it still didn't make a difference. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know, a freshman in college, there's still times where like, what if I work hard enough, maybe I could get there. You know what I mean? Maybe I can develop the skills and get to the NBA. And I remember a couple of times guarding these guys, and I think to myself, they have something I do not have. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah,
there's,
yeah.
like there was a speed factor for sure, but even like reflexes, timing, things like that. And I was just like, this is next level. You know what I mean? But yeah,
Yeah.
it's bad when you're trying to block the eyesight of the guy you're guarding. You're like that. This is the final stage. This is the final stage of desperation.
Yeah. Yeah. Last bodybuilding show, a buddy of mine here locally competed. Actually had Dorian Yates train him. He wasn't enhanced, but he very impressive, won Mr. Wisconsin. And he's, spent a lot of time and effort doing it. Super smart dude. And I think he was competing at a show in Colorado. I don't know if it was a national show or what. And he's like, I'm going up this long escalator. And I see this massive dude at the top. And I'm going, who the hell is that? And he goes up and talks to him. And he's like, hey, how long you been training? Like, what are you doing? He's like, man, you're huge. He's like, I think it was Phil Keith when he first just did his Colorado show on like 10 weeks of training or something. And he's
Oh,
like,
God.
yeah, I just been training for like 10 weeks and my buddies told me I should do this thing. And my buddy's looking at him and he's like, I honestly decided at that point, I'm retiring. He's like, I can't, he's like, I can't compete against that. He's like, I'm out.
It's some people just have it. It's funny because like my girlfriend right now, when I met her, she did not train, but you can spot the potential of people. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like
for
you
sure.
can
Yeah.
like sometimes it's like seeing a 7 foot tall person. They're like, "What's basketball? I don't know." You know what I mean? And I remember when she was like, "Oh, I'm kind of interested in this." I was like, "I think you're gonna build muscle very quickly once you start." And she's like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, I can just spot after all these years, I can spot it." And it's like after 6 months of training, you can see like the separation in her quad,
Oh,
and
wow.
and like yeah, just and that's from like one set of leg extensions a week and like one set of squats. I'm not even joking. 6 months of training and one set, because I even told her, I was like, she didn't know how big she wanted to get in certain regards, and so I was like, I'd only do one set though with your genetics. And she got her like her DNA test back, and it said in her DNA test, uh, you know, genetic composition found often in elite power athletes.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, yeah, I figured because I could tell. And I was like, most people don't have a split in their quads after 6 months of one leg
Yeah.
extension per week. It's just kind of funny. Yeah.
Yeah. And
But
that's what's
go
so
for
hard too, because like everyone is comparing everything to everyone else, and you can't, everything is just like a snapshot of where they are now. So you don't necessarily see where they started either. You know what I mean? And so it's like we get the praise to the genetic freaks who maybe didn't have to work as hard as other people, which is fine. That's just the way life goes. But then you see their training and you're like, "Oh, well, I must not have to work that hard because it worked for this person or that person." It's like,
yeah.
but you're talking about completely different case studies and circumstances and context and everything else too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about that often because, if I even take my own, I have poor bodybuilding genetics. Like my wrists are very thin, and I
Yeah,
have a
me too.
more
That's
narrow
I don't do
stripe. Yeah,
bodybuilding.
it's interesting because I think it would have been impossible for me to be the coach that I am if everything I did worked. You know
Sure.
what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's interesting because I was pretty obsessive with documenting. I guinea pigged on myself so much, and I my ex-wife is actually my assistant and business partner in a lot of things, and we still get along great. And I always joke with her because at the beginning of my career, I was so obsessive with documenting what I was trying, what were the results, and I have boxes and boxes of notebooks and notes and all of this written down. And I mean, realistically, if I were just progressing and happy with how I was progressing, I never would have done that. But
Yeah, yeah.
I always joke with her. I'm like, yeah, now as somebody who's coached hundreds of pros and world champions, people are like, of course. Oh, there seems to be more anything here. There we go. As I have all these notebooks and all these notes and stuff in the boxes of them, as somebody who's coached, in hindsight, somebody who's coached all these, winners and had a good career at this, yeah, it makes sense. I'm like, you were sitting there watching me, someone who has never competed before, only been training for like a year or two, compulsively documenting all of this stuff. I was like, you're probably like, oh my God, what kind of psycho did I marry here? But once again, I think it's like, in my experience, some of the people that a significant portion of the people that I've coached that have become world champions, they have somehow combined this elite genetic ability with, they've almost convinced themselves that they don't have good genetics.
Yeah.
That's usually the case.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking about the elite of the elite.
Yes, yeah. I really find that the people that I've coached that become either a world champion or like top 3 in the world, they have these elite genetics, but they always talk about, they're like, well, due to my disadvantages. Like they think they've, I don't know if it's a tactic. I often don't think it is, but they've convinced themselves they don't have the advantages of these other elite guys. So they've got to outwork them. And then like, that's when you're really dealing with somebody who's like, they're ready to go to that next level. And then after they get their first win, they kind of are like, they have the attitude of, I can win, but it's more along the lines of, I can't give them an inch. You know what I mean? Because once again, they have these advantages that I don't. So it's interesting combination of the physical and the mental that leads to somebody being so great.
Yeah. And I think even just how they talk about it and how they set everything up. Like, the examples I think of are, like Michael Phelps is very well documented to have exactly the same ritual. We can argue if that's good or bad for how many years in a row, like unbroken, like just like one of his coaches said, like he would even come in, like his towel placement on the bench would be the same, right? Just everything was the same. And again, there's going to be a cost to that. But you look at him and you go, yeah, that guy looks like he could be a pretty high level swimmer. Like he has, there's been certain arguments about, size of the feet and, all this other kind of stuff too. But he put in all the time and effort to do all of the training on top of everything too. So like the NFL, I think of like Justin Jefferson, who very talented, but his idea of status is to do whatever it is to have the team to win. It's never, I'm just gonna hang around and not do much for the next 4 months. It's always like, what is the next thing I can do? How can I be a little bit better? What is it? Even already being at the elite of the elite, those people tend to be either I need to work harder or it's always the next thing. It's never, I'm just going to take 12 months off and whatever, they already paid me money. I'm good. Which I always
Yes.
find it's just even what they say and just the mindset is super fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also see that in coaching, like
Sure.
I think there's a difference between the people that just want to continually get better over and over and over again. And it is interesting too with coaching, at least in the bodybuilding industry. I feel like when access to information became more readily available, for the first 5, 6, 7 years, I thought things, competition in the coaching sphere in bodybuilding, I can only speak to bodybuilding,
Sure.
but it got tougher. I felt like my skill was raising, but at the same time, the industry skill was raising. And so it was like this, it was an arms race, so to speak. But for some reason, I want to say 7 years ago, I felt like the skill level of bodybuilding coaching started to decline. Um, and I can't really figure out why that is. I don't know. And it's interesting because, I think that kind of like with training, when it comes to like understanding of this whole process, I think the longer you do it, you can still keep improving, but the rate of improvement slows as you've learned,
For sure.
more. And so my rate of improvement has slowed, but like just as an example, you know, um, wins have increased. And I don't think that's me. I think that, I'm doing what I've largely always done, but I think the field has diminished a bit. And I think it's because I don't know. I think it's once again because I think that sometimes people will mistake views. Oh, people said that I like, people will be like, oh, I recommended 4 to 8 reps and nothing else, and people like it. So then you're kind of pigeonholed into only prescribing 4 to 8 reps, and then other people go and prescribe only 4 to 8 reps, and then it's like, so it's very interesting to me. I'm kind of, I've been in this industry long enough, and you've been in even longer than me. I'm kind of curious to see if things will come back around towards just searching for truly more effective practice, or if it'll kind of stay in this spot for a while. But I think it applies to coaching, where it's like, I think some coaches, because there are some very good ones out there. That's not to say that there are no good ones. There's some very good. There's a few coaches out there. When I know they have a client in a show that I have a client, I'm like, we got to bring it, right? You know what I mean? And I think that those coaches, I know, they are always, even if they're near the top of the industry, they are always acting like it could be pulled out from them at any given moment. You know what I mean? And it's like, they have this drive where it's like they're obsessive about it. And it is funny. You also mentioned the autistic people. I'm not sure. Do you know who Austin Stout is?
I was just thinking of him. I love Austin. He's great.
Yeah. And and it's like, he and I were joking one time, because I've helped Austin come into his last few shows, because like you said,
cool.
Nobody's objective in the final few weeks, and I become his objective eye, basically.
Yeah.
And
which is why I literally send photos out to other people. I've sent some to you in the past. I sent some to other people, because I'm like, I know how much effort you put into this, and I am not objective. I am just not objective.
Yeah. And Austin and I were joking, where it's almost like every great coach, because I consider Austin a great coach, and like every great coach that I've known, there's always, when you sit down and really get to talk to them, particularly like when the camera's off, there's always something you're like, they're not a totally normal person.
No.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, everybody's like, the thing that's abnormal about every great coach, and I'll fall into this category too, is like, it's all different kinds of not normal. You know what I mean? But I'm like, I don't know if a normal person could do this job at the highest level either.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's interesting though.
Yeah. Also, I've often joked, like, and I'll get some hate mail for this, like, then like my buddy Cal Dietz. I'm like, oh, he's a crazy man. People are like, oh, you're pissed off at Cal. I'm like, no, I mean that in like the literal sense. Like, he's borderline crazy, but he has like some of the best training stuff, and he's done things that people have, never done before in the industry. So it's kind of like a weird compliment, because I think, like you said, at the highest level, like none of the ones I know are normal. And that's like a compliment. Like, if you called someone like, that's pretty normal, they'd take it as like an insult.
I know. And it is so funny, because even like sometimes when I run my mentorship courses, every once in a while I'll get somebody in the course where, even if their education level is currently very low, right? They're just like totally at the beginning, but sometimes they'll say something that strikes me as odd, and I'm like, this they might have what it takes. You know what I mean? I'm like, they might have what it takes. It's just, I don't know. It's funny observing after having been in a long time, where it's like, yeah, you got to spot something a little bit off about the person to know that they could go far in this industry.
Yeah. And I think you kind of have to do that, because there's so many different areas you can go to. Even with bodybuilding stuff, you could go into more of the psychology. You can look at, like Austin's doing a lot of the functional stuff with blood work. You can look at the training. You can look at the research. You can look at, obviously, nutrition, supplementation, sleep, research with HRV. How do you manage, fatigue? There's tons of stuff you can go into that are actually, to some degree, needed, I think, to be at the highest level. And so it's just, to me, it's just this never-ending thing of these little areas you can go into. And because at the end of the day, bodybuilding's a weird thing. And I stole this from Austin Stout, as his quote of, he's like, we're trying to make like the best race car we can, and then we're going to crash it, and we're going to try to make sure that it doesn't get as much damage, but we're definitely going to crash it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe one of the ways I could bring it together is like, every year in my coaching process. And I guess I would like it if more people did this in the fitness spot, but like I audit myself.
Mm.
I at the end of every contest season, I run through an audit and I ask myself, what did I do this year that really worked? Like what did I do well? What needs improvement? What did I do differently that I'd like to keep, and what did I do differently that I think I need to get rid of? And I'll also look back at my. There's a few clients. Sometimes they're not even the clients that win. They're the clients that I felt like they were as good as they could possibly be. Um, and I look back at my email exchanges with them. Did I say certain things? Did I not say certain things? How was my pacing? What were the changes like? What kind of training did I have them on? And I kind of ponder that, like what did I do well there? And then I also look at the ones where I felt like I maybe left a little bit on the table. You know what I mean? Like they could have been a little bit better. What did I do wrong with pacing? What could I have done better? Sometimes it's hard to look at the ones you felt like you missed an opportunity with,
Yeah.
but you gotta do that stuff. And then I go back to what I said. What do I know? What do I think? And what am I sure that I don't know? And it's like I find that kind of keeps me improving every year and keeps my knowledge base and skill sets improving. And I think that, even if you're not coaching, even if you're just doing this for yourself, it's a worthy endeavor to kind of look back in your more recent memory and kind of run through that audit process because it does force you to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And also just kind of like the after action report, like, okay, how did things go? What were some things we did well? What were the things that we could, do different? I think that's as much as everybody wants to have all the wins and everything else, like the times I've learned the most from were absolute trash bin catastrophes. And at the time, just horrible. Like it just, and then, and a lot of times it wasn't necessarily for any one particular thing, circumstances, whatever, it's a combination of things. But those are also the times you probably learn the most too, is it's just utterly painful and sucky as it is.
Yeah, it is interesting. And that's the other thing too, is like sometimes I think the ability to take a failure or a loss or and just eat it and learn from it and keep moving forward is such a big thing. And it's funny because like there have been times where I've had failures or whatever, and in the moment it seemed so heavy. Do you know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
like, because you're the only person bearing the full weight of this, and then it's like
Hmm.
a couple years later, nobody even noticed. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like, and it's like this is funny in hindsight, and it's interesting. People seem to usually remember your successes more than your failures. I think as long as you continue to produce successes at a higher rate, but it's
Hmm.
like like you said, but then those successes come from learning from those mistakes you made along the way.
Yeah, it's the catch-22 of if you didn't make those mistakes, you wouldn't be where you're at. Like one of the little phrases I like is just fail forward as fast as possible, right? Like
Yeah,
you're gonna make mistakes, but okay, what did you learn from it? Like how do you set it up? And even with programming, I think of, okay, like I'm gonna go this route, but if I know that doesn't work by the way I've constrained it, I know the next answer after it, right? Where I feel like in the past, I didn't think those 3 steps ahead. I'm just like, oh, this guy said this is the best program ever. Let's just do it. Where over time, I think you get more strategic of, okay, well, let's push it a little bit. Here's the risks that's involved. Is it okay if that doesn't work? Let's go this direction. I think you get a little bit better at prediction of what could happen in the future too.
yeah. Man, you nailed something too. There is like I do think that's well, and it's interesting because you have had so much formal education, and it's interesting because I think that there's the ability to free think because it's like I'm sure you've done this where you've met not every person with a PhD is equal. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Oh yeah, yeah.
and sometimes I try to tell people like and it's like I think one disadvantage of me being like having a self-directed education is like I'll get a piece of like information, right? And it's almost like a puzzle piece. And I don't know what it connects to, if that makes sense. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Now what do I do with this? Whereas like in school, there's such this advantage where like, well, they go, this connects to this. And you're like, oh. But I think some people, and this is where it's like you got to just still, regardless of what direction you take, you got to be able to do the work, because it's like, okay, you got to get to know it. Whereas like when I go the self-directed route, I'm like, I have to think about this piece. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't know what it connects to, so I have to figure it out. So it's like, somebody with me like me, I don't have that formal education, so I don't. There's no way I would ever be able to have as many puzzle pieces as you, having gone through the formal schooling. Does that make sense? So it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
I think the deal I always try to tell other people that are going the self-directed route, but even I have some people in my mentorships that have like masters and stuff like that. Is like, I'm like, don't lose sight of the fact that you still need to see the big picture. Like, I have fewer puzzle pieces than somebody with their PhD, but I spend a lot of time trying to get the big picture. And I feel like some people get so, and like we talk about the people online where they're just like, oh, I should do this many reps and this many sets. And they're just trying to like gather puzzle pieces, and they never actually take the time to like look at what they have. So I think it's just this endeavor where it's like you're just continually gathering these bits of information and trying to hang them in a way that makes sense, and then you can identify what this big picture you're looking at is.
Yeah, I think of those people as collectors versus integrators. And
Yeah.
usually the big red flag of a collector is someone who has every acronym after their name, and they're usually like just ace level one, or they're like things you could do in 8 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's like 14 of them after their name. I'm like, oh, poor bastard. Like they're just collecting information thinking that the collection is going to solve their issue. And like you said, they're not figuring out where to put the right pieces. And they've been sold the lie that if they just collect more info, that'll solve their issue. And yes, you need info at some point, but then you have to learn how to actually apply it and integrate it too.
Yeah. Which, sometimes can be easier said than done, but that's where the hard part comes in, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the application. I mean, that's what actually determines what's working and not. And the downside, I think, of a formal degree is also that you can become hyper rigid because you were literally taught that this is the way, air quotes, this is the linear line of thinking, this is the end result of that. And it becomes very easy, I think, to dismiss other data in front of you. The first time I saw a guy do a max Wingate test with a Moxie on his quad, and I saw that after 30 seconds, he went from 80% oxygenation to 13. I was like, whoa, either this device is the world's biggest piece of crap because it says it's using a ton of oxygen, or everything I learned about anaerobic exercise is probably not correct. But it has to be one of the two. And so, of course, my knee-jerk response is, oh, that device is a piece of shit. It can't work, right?
Yeah.
And later I find out, oh no, what I learned was not really correct.
It's interesting because I think that so I've known some coaches that are somewhat effective having gone the formal education route, but then there's a couple that I would say, I tend to be harder on the coaches. Having gone the formal education route myself, I probably tend to be a little harder on the formal. I'm sorry, having gone the self-directed education route, I tend to be a little harder on those that are also self-directed. It's like, because like that's the path I traveled, and I feel like there's a certain way you should probably do things. But I have a lot of respect for people when they've gone the self-directed education route and they really make their best effort to understand the science behind what they are doing,
Yeah.
not just pure observation.
Yep.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, like I respect those that have gone deeply into the formal education route. Like I think of you, Peter Fitchen.
Yeah, Peter's great.
Yeah.
Love Peter.
But that also have this incredibly open mind. Because I think sometimes I view with the self-directed group, I think sometimes there's this lack of understanding, to a degree. And then sometimes I think when I've seen people that have gone the formal education route, there's a rigidity that I see.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I really respect people that have been able to take their path but avoid the pitfall that comes with that path, so to speak. and it's not easy. But like, yeah, like I said, you and Pete, and by the way, and Pete is one of those guys. So funny enough, I've coached Pete for 12 years now.
Oh, that's
And
wild.
yeah, I've coached Pete for 12 years now. And he was just starting his coaching journey. He was finishing his PhD when I started coaching him, and then just starting to coach. And Pete is one of those coaches now. When he has a client at my show, where I have a client in it, I think, oh shit, I need to really bring it. Like Pete has gotten to be such a formidable coach. I'm like, we gotta bring it when Pete's bringing somebody to the show.
Oh, that's cool. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. But no, I think it is a process that is never ending. But once again, that's the fun part.
Yeah, and it's good with the application is you get to see sort of an end result too, and I think that's helping to close some of those feedback loops also, which is super helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Awesome. Well, where can people find out more about everything you got going on? And you got the app going, you've got a lot of social media stuff. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, yeah. My social media is mostly on Instagram. It's at CW Team Wilson. And yeah, I do have my new app out, the Raw Intensity app. I got the logo on me there.
There you go.
The idea behind the app was that not everybody can afford a good coach, and the app is focused on the people being able to follow the training programs that my champion bodybuilders follow. It's always like you want to be able to see what you know pro competitors are using and doing. This is kind of like your chance to follow along with those. And I do have my new book coming out in about a month here, so that
Oh,
should be
tell
out.
us about that.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah,
Congrats.
yeah. I saw several years ago. I wrote a bodybuilding book with Pete, Dr. Peter
Yeah,
Fitchen.
that's right.
We
Yes.
wrote it, and it was good. It's done really well. It's been translated into 5 different languages now, I believe.
Oh, awesome.
And so this book is not a bodybuilding book, but you mentioned it before. We do so much psychological coaching in this
Hmm.
process because once again, you need your mind to be stronger. And I actually wrote it selfishly because at a certain point, I was like, rather than just giving this information to each client bit by bit, I'd kind of like to just have one full text of everything I'm trying to instill into them, if
Mm.
that makes sense. I meant it to, I started off with it being kind of a short, we'll read, but it grew. And now I have like 200 cited sources and it's like 250 pages.
Oh,
And
wow.
then, but then I also wanted to make sure it was scientifically accurate. So I had it reviewed by 2 PhD psychologists to make sure the information is
Oh,
also
nice.
accurate. So put a lot of work into this. And once again, it's not a bodybuilding book, but I think it will benefit bodybuilders and anybody that really just wants to get the most out of themselves in a very difficult endeavor that they are going for. Yeah,
What's the name? Where can we get it?
I will. The name is it's gonna be called Becoming Unrivaled.
Mm.
I'm gonna warn people it's not your typical like self help. It's not a rah rah you can do it kind of book. It's more of it's a pretty deep dive if that makes sense. And I'm gonna sell it first on my website. It's teamwilsonbb.com, and then later on I'll be putting it on Amazon as well.
Oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely make notes and everything in there. And depending on when this is out, it might be live so people can pick it up. And yeah, I'm excited to read that. I think that's a huge area, especially to have that kind of resource for new coaches and people getting into the industry and even people who are just doing difficult things, whether it's any type of physique sport, competition, etc. I think it'll be super useful.
Yeah, so that's actually why I left bodybuilding out of it. Because I felt like, while I know a lot of coaches use me and Pete's bodybuilding book, sometimes it can be hard for them to recommend the book to their clients
Right.
because they may do things a little bit differently than we do. And then they're recommending this book that may contradict something they're prescribing, and then they have to explain the contradiction.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so my goal is that this book will also make coaches' jobs easier, where because sometimes clients put a lot of responsibility onto their coaches to fix their mental deficiencies.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and you mentioned it, there's a lot of routes you can go in specialization in coaching. Like, maybe someone else has chosen the route of like the integrated health aspects or the functional aspects. And it's like, not every coach can be highly educated in everything. So
Yeah.
this is kind of a way to maybe outsource a little bit of that without stepping on your own toes in terms of a methodology standpoint with your diet and training.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the info. I'll highly encourage people to check out the app, the website, and the book that's coming out. And thank you so much for all the great stuff. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.